Jung discovered something studying patients for 40 years that sounds like delusion, but is actually psychological law. The people who acted as if life was rigged in their favor had fundamentally different outcomes than those who acted as if it was rigged against them. Not because of positive thinking or manifestation, but because the psyche creates what it deeply expects, and reality has a disturbing tendency to confirm our unconscious assumptions. Here's what's terrifying. You're already acting as if certain things are true about life, and life is responding exactly as you unconsciously expect. The question isn't whether to act as if you're already doing it. The question is whether you're acting as if everything works against you or for you. And that unconscious choice is creating your reality more than any conscious decision you've ever made. I'm about to show you why Jung believed this principle could reorganize your entire existence. Not through wishful thinking, but through understanding how the psyche magnetizes experience to match its deepest expectations. Here's what Jung observed that changed everything. Two patients with identical problems had opposite outcomes based solely on their unconscious assumption about how life treats them. The one who deeply believed life supported them found solutions everywhere. The one who believed life opposed them found obstacles everywhere. Same external reality. Completely different experiences, determined by their psychological orientation. This wasn't about optimism versus pessimism. Jung was looking at something deeper, the psyche's fundamental stance toward existence. Some people unconsciously operate from the assumption that life is essentially hostile, that things won't work out, that they must fight for every scrap. Others unconsciously assume life is essentially supportive, that things tend to work out, that they're somehow held by existence. The disturbing part? Both groups find endless evidence for their assumption. The person who acts as if life is against them encounters hostility, obstacle, betrayal, exactly as expected. The person who acts as if life supports them encounters opportunity, synchronicity, assistance, exactly as expected. It's as if the psyche creates a magnetic field that attracts experiences matching its fundamental assumption. Jung called this psychological constellation. How our deepest beliefs about reality constellation experiences that confirm those beliefs. You're not finding evidence for how life is. You're creating evidence for what you already believe. Your unconscious assumption becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that feels like objective truth. But here's Jung's breakthrough. You can change your unconscious assumption, not through affirmations or positive thinking, but through what he called acting as if, consciously behaving from a different assumption until your psyche reorganizes around it. When you act as if everything works out for you, genuinely, not desperately, you activate psychological mechanisms that actually make things work out. Jung's first discovery about acting as if everything works out. It dramatically increases synchronicities, those meaningful coincidences that seem like reality is conspiring to help you. Not because you're manifesting, but because you're finally psychologically available to notice and receive the support that was always there. When you act as if life works against you, your psyche is in defensive mode. You're scanning for threats, expecting problems, bracing for impact. This defensive stance makes you psychologically blind to opportunities, deaf to assistance, unable to recognize synchronicities even when they're obvious. You literally can't see help because you're not looking for it. But when you act as if everything works out, your psyche shifts to receptive mode. You're scanning for opportunities, expecting solutions, open to assistance. Suddenly, synchronicities multiply. The right person appears, the perfect book falls off the shelf, the needed resources manifest. They were always there, but your psychological orientation made you unable to perceive them. Jung documented this with a patient who believed life was fundamentally against her. She complained about never catching breaks, never meeting helpful people, never finding opportunities. Jung suggested an experiment. For 1 month, act as if life was trying to help her, not believe it. Act as if it were true. Within a week, she reported multiple synchronicities. A stranger in a cafe mentioned exactly the job opportunity she needed. A book she'd randomly picked up contained the solution to a problem she'd struggled with for years. An old friend called out of nowhere with precisely the connection she required. Had these synchronicities suddenly started, or had she suddenly started noticing them? Jung believed it was both. When you act as if everything works out, you become psychologically available to synchronicities, and your changed psychological field actually generates more of them. Your psyche collaborates with reality differently when it expects support rather than opposition. You're not forcing synchronicities, you're creating the psychological conditions where they naturally occur. This is the first principle. Acting as if everything works out makes you a synchronicity magnet, not through magic, but through psychological availability. When you expect life to support you, you notice its support. When you act from that noticing, life supports you more. It's a psychological feedback loop that creates the reality it assumes. Jung's second insight reveals why acting as if everything works out actually makes things work out. It activates the transcendent function, your psyche's ability to find third options beyond either-or dilemmas. When you assume solutions exist, your unconscious creates them from possibilities your conscious mind can't see. Most people face problems from an assumption of scarcity, either this or that. Win or lose, success or failure. This binary thinking comes from acting as if resources are limited, options are few, and life is zero-sum. The psyche, responding to this assumption, only shows you binary options. You literally can't see third options because your psychological stance excludes them. But when you act as if everything works out, you assume abundance of possibility. There must be a solution, even if you can't see it. There must be a way through, even if it's not obvious. This assumption activates the transcendent function, which creates solutions beyond the apparent either-or. Not choosing between options, but transcending the limitation that created those options. Jung witnessed this repeatedly. Patients stuck between impossible choices, security or passion, relationship or freedom, success or authenticity, would remain stuck as long as they acted as if they had to choose. But when they shifted to acting as if there was a solution that included both needs, the transcendent function would create exactly that solution. One businessman faced bankruptcy or selling his company to someone who'd destroy everything he'd built. Acting from scarcity, these seemed like the only options. Jung helped him shift to acting as if a perfect solution existed, even if invisible. Within weeks, a third option emerged, a partnership he'd never considered with someone he'd overlooked, saving both company and vision. The solution hadn't suddenly appeared. It had always been there, but his psyche couldn't show it to him, while he was acting as if only two bad options existed. When he acted as if everything works out, his unconscious revealed the transcendent solution that had been waiting for psychological permission to emerge. This is crucial. Acting as if everything works out doesn't mean denying problems. It means assuming solutions exist beyond your current perception. When you hold this assumption, your psyche naturally generates creative solutions, not through positive thinking, but through activating psychological functions that only operate when you assume positive possibilities. Jung's third principle is the most profound. When you act as if everything works out, you unconsciously integrate shadow material that would otherwise sabotage you. The shadow, all your rejected aspects, either works against you or for you, depending on your fundamental assumption about life's nature. Here's how it works. If you act as if life is against you, your shadow becomes your saboteur. Your repressed anger attacks opportunities. Your rejected power undermines success. Your disowned desires derail progress. The shadow confirms your assumption by ensuring things don't work out, creating the hostile reality you expect. But when you act as if everything works out for you, your shadow becomes your secret ally. Your repressed anger becomes fuel for breakthrough. Your rejected power emerges when needed. Your disowned desires guide you toward fulfillment. The shadow confirms your positive assumption by ensuring things do work out, creating the supportive reality you expect. Jung discovered this through dream analysis. Patients who believed life opposed them had dreams of being chased, attacked, undermined, their shadow as enemy. Patients who believed life supported them had dreams of unexpected help, hidden resources, mysterious allies, their shadow as friend. Same psychological material, opposite relationship, determined by fundamental assumption. One woman constantly sabotaged her own success, always snatching defeat from victory's jaws. Through analysis, Jung helped her see she was unconsciously acting as if she didn't deserve good outcomes. Her shadow, containing all her rejected worthiness and power, was ensuring her assumption proved correct by sabotaging anything good. When she began acting as if she deserved good outcomes, as if life wanted her to succeed, her shadow transformed from saboteur to supporter. The same unconscious forces that had undermined her began supporting her. Hidden talents emerged, forgotten connections reappeared. Self-sabotage transformed into self-support. This reveals the shadow secret. It's neutral energy that takes the shape of your deepest assumptions. Act as if life opposes you, and your shadow becomes opposition. Act as if life supports you, and your shadow becomes support. You're not changing your shadow. You're changing its orientation through your fundamental stance toward existence. Jung's fourth discovery about acting as if everything works out involves what he called participation mystique, the unconscious interconnection between psyche and world. Your psychological state doesn't just interpret reality, it participates in creating it. When you act as if everything works out, you're not just changing your perception, you're changing the field in which events occur. This sounds mystical, but Jung observed it empirically. When someone genuinely shifted their fundamental assumption about life's nature, the world around them shifted too. Not just their experience of the world, the actual behaviors of people, the timing of events, the emergence of opportunities, as if reality itself was responding to their psychological change. Jung experienced this personally during his Red Book period, when he shifted from fighting his visions to assuming they were helping him. Not just his experience changed, synchronicities exploded, patients with exactly the right problems appeared, books with needed answers literally fell into his hands. Reality seemed to reorganize around his changed psychological stance. This isn't magical thinking, it's psychological participation. Your psyche is not separate from the world observing it. It's part of the world creating it. When you act as if everything works out, you're broadcasting a psychological frequency that others unconsciously respond to. People unconsciously want to help those who expect help. Opportunities unconsciously gravitate toward those who expect opportunities. One of Jung's patients, a struggling artist, transformed his life through participation mystique. He shifted from acting as if the art world was closed to him to acting as if it was waiting for him. Not arrogantly, but genuinely assuming he belonged, was wanted, would be received. Within months, gallery owners approached him, collectors appeared, opportunities manifested. Had he suddenly become a better artist? Number. But his changed psychological participation created a different field around him. People unconsciously felt his assumption of belonging and responded accordingly. Reality collaborated with his expectation of collaboration. The world participated in his assumption of welcome. This is the participation principle. When you act as if everything works out for you, you're not just changing your mind, you're changing the psychological field you exist in. Others unconsciously feel your expectation and tend to fulfill it. Reality seems to conspire with your assumption, not because you're forcing it, but because you're participating differently in the co-creation of experience. Jung's final insight about acting as if everything works out. It accelerates individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. When you assume life supports your becoming, you take risks authentic to your nature. When you assume life opposes you, you stay safely false. The assumption determines whether you individuate or stagnate. Think about it. If you believe everything works out, you'll follow your genuine interests even if unconventional. You'll express your authentic self even if different. You'll pursue your true path even if uncertain. Why? Because you assume life supports your authenticity. This assumption gives you courage to individuate. But if you believe life works against you, you'll choose safety over authenticity every time. You'll hide your true self to avoid attack. You'll follow conventional paths to minimize risk. You'll sacrifice individuation for security. Your assumption that life opposes you keeps you from becoming yourself. Jung observed that patients who shifted to acting as if life supported them invariably began individuating faster. They stopped hiding their true nature. They risked expressing authentic thoughts. They pursued paths aligned with their genuine self, rather than social expectations. The assumption of support gave them permission to be themselves. One man lived a false life for 50 years, terrified that being himself would lead to rejection and ruin. When he began acting as if life supported his authentic expression, he finally risked showing his true nature, creative, sensitive, unconventional. Instead of the rejection he'd feared, he found his tribe, his calling, his joy. Life did support him, but only when he acted as if it would. This is the individuation key. You can only become yourself if you assume it's safe to do so. Acting as if everything works out gives you that safety, not guarantee of outcome, but trust in process. Not promise of success, but faith in unfolding. When you assume life supports your becoming, you actually become. Jung's complete principle of acting as if everything works out reveals multiple psychological mechanisms. You become a synchronicity generator, available to support always present. The transcendent function activates, creating solutions beyond binaries. Your shadow transforms from saboteur to secret ally. Participation mystique changes the field of possibility around you. Individuation accelerates because you feel safe to be yourself. This isn't about denying problems or forced optimism. It's about choosing your fundamental psychological stance toward existence. You're already acting as if something is true about life. The question is whether your assumption is creating the reality you want or the one you fear. Here's what Jung discovered that sounds too simple to be true. You're already acting as if certain things are true about life, and life is confirming your assumptions with disturbing consistency. The person acting as if they're unlucky is. The person acting as if they're unsupported is. Not because life is actually against them, but because their psychological stance creates that reality. But here's the liberation. You can change your fundamental assumption, not through affirmations or visualization, but through genuine psychological shift. Start acting as if everything works out for you, not desperately hoping, but calmly assuming. Watch how reality reorganizes to match your assumption. Try Jung's experiment. For 1 week, approach everything as if life is trying to help you. That problem, assume it contains a gift. That obstacle, assume it's redirecting you somewhere better. That rejection, assume it's protection from something not meant for you. Not fake positivity, genuine assumption that life is on your side. Notice what happens. Synchronicities will multiply. Solutions will emerge. People will help unexpectedly. Not because you're forcing anything, but because you're finally available to support. That was always there. You're activating psychological functions that only work when you assume they will. Jung's deepest insight. The people who act as if everything works out aren't lucky. They're psychologically oriented toward noticing and creating favorable outcomes. The assumption becomes reality, not through magic, but through psychological mechanisms that respond to fundamental stance. You've been acting as if something is true your whole life. If you've been acting as if life opposes you, you have years of evidence confirming it. But that evidence isn't proof of reality. It's proof of the power of assumption. Change the assumption, and the evidence changes too. Act as if everything always works out for you. Not because it's true, but because acting as if makes it true. If you're ready to transform your fundamental assumptions and activate the psychological mechanisms that create favorable outcomes, subscribe to this channel where I decode Jung's most powerful insights. Watch the video on your screen now about synchronicity. Jung's discovery of how inner psychological states create outer meaningful coincidences. Remember, you're already acting as if something is true about life. Make sure you're acting as if something that serves rather than sabotages you.